Afternoon, and welcome to yet another exciting edition of the QBRI Talks for Early Career Researchers. This is a webinar series that shares expert opinion on career development strategies for science professionals. My name is Advati Naik, and I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the Qatar Biomedical Research Institute. A couple of housekeeping rules before we begin. The microphone of all attendees has been muted, but please feel free to post your questions during the course of the talk in the Q&A tab and not the chat tab. If you're using a mobile device, you will find the Q&A tab by clicking on the circle with the three dots as shown here. Please also direct these questions to all the panelists to make sure that your questions are visible to us. The webinar will be recorded and shared on the HBKU YouTube channel. So whether you're a fresh graduate or have been in academia or industry for a while, job applications, drafting CVs, and interviews can always be intimidating. So today we'd like to discuss the basics of CV and cover letter writing and share expert opinion on how to make your application stand out and how to make a positive impression during job interviews. With this, I'd like to welcome our guest speaker today, Dr. Julie de Kock. Dr. de Kock is a scientist at QBRI and holds a joint assistant professor position at the College of Health and Life Sciences at HBKU. She completed her PhD in medical sciences at the Catholic University of Leuven in Belgium and undertook a postdoctoral position at the University of East Anglia in the UK. Dr. de Kock joined QBRI in 2013, where her research interests have focused on key areas in the breast cancer and infectious disease fields. In addition to her research activities, Dr. de Kock serves as the chair of the QBRI Technical Staff and Postdoctoral Researchers Recruitment Task Force, and is also a member of the Postgraduate Admissions Committee of the Biological and Biomedical Sciences Program at the College of Health and Life Sciences at HBKU. As such, she has vast experience with job applications in research as an applicant herself, but also as an application reviewer. Dr. Julie, thank you for taking the time to talk to us today and for sharing your advice on increasing the chances of securing that next job. I'll leave the floor to you to share your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. First of all, thank you so much for having me. It's my great pleasure. I'll try to share my slides. Okay, can you let me know if they are visible?
Yes, they are.
Yes, okay, perfect. Okay, so once again, thank you so much. So today I will try to give you a little bit of tips and tricks, what to do, what not to do, or at least to try to avoid or limit while you're writing your CV, your cover letter, and also what to do during job interviews. So obviously, I don't have anything to declare in this context. So briefly, the things I want to discuss with all of you is how to introduce yourself through emails, what to do with your cover letter, how to make sure that it stands out from all the, honestly, hundreds of cover letters that we see every day. And then the same with your CV, and what is the difference between a CV and a resume? And then the end, but maybe not the least, I will also give you some pointers regarding interviews. So maybe just to give you a little bit of an idea of who I am, so that you at least know what is my background. So as Adviti already pointed out, I have a career in science. So I had my PhD in medical sciences from Belgium, then I pursued a postdoc in the UK, and I started at QBRI in Qatar as a postdoc and then transitioned into an independent group leader position. And I also hold a joint assistant professorship at HBKU College of Health and Life Sciences. So obviously I come from an academic research career. And as Adviti also again pointed out in her kind introduction, I do have experience with looking at many CVs, many applications through some of my other activities that I do. So that's why I would like to talk to you today. So the first thing is email introductions. So obviously, many of the job applications are not actually announced. Oftentimes, when you're looking for a PhD position, a postdoc, you will just kind of, put yourself out there. And then it's really important that your email is properly structured and clear, concise, and I will give you some tips for that. Because honestly, we get so many emails every day that obviously if your email is not really standing out, it will be quickly overlooked. So it's really important if you send an email to any prospective employer to really catch their attention. So as I mentioned, email introductions are most of the time unsolicited. So it's just like you were looking around, you found on a website an interesting group, or you heard via about someone that might be looking for new positions in their group, or you just stumbled upon, some papers and you're interested to join that group. So as I mentioned, the emails have to be clear and concise. So what does that mean? We don't want to have an email of pages, okay? So it has to be really in 1-2 paragraphs. And what content do you need to cover? First of all, of course, who are you? What are you looking for? Because sometimes we don't know. Are you looking for a postdoc? Or are you looking more for a technical support staff position? Or are you looking to maybe transition into teaching or having your own position as group leader and so on? So it's always important to clearly highlight that as well. It's also always really nice if you can highlight why are you emailing this person? How did you hear about their research? And why are you interested in particularly this PI or this that team? So, and one of the tricks or one of the things that I would say is make sure you don't just say anything you think that person would like to hear. Make sure that actually your experience fits with what this person is doing. Because obviously, if someone is emailing me and they say, oh, I've worked on embryology as a cancer researcher, immediately I would be like, why do you want to apply in my group? So make sure that either your experience fits or that you kind of explain in your email, you've been working on this, but you would like to have like a change or a transition or broaden your experience or so on. One other tip I want to give you is do not impose any project or proposal. Of course, this is my personal opinion, but for me, when I see the first email from someone, so my first interaction, my first impression of someone, and they immediately write me, oh, I want to work on this and this, and then do this and this and this, I will be like, oh, okay, you already have your plans. So you actually just looking for someone to give you the money to do the work. So of course you can always, point out what is your interest, but don't impose your project or proposal. Very important, tailor your email, address the person by name. Many times I get emails that are just addressed dear ma'am or even dear sir. So if you keep it very general like this, at least make sure that you know whether the person is female or male. And also make sure that you don't put the wrong name. Because I've also received previously emails that are actually directed to another professor, another doctor, and sent to me. So that, again, does not give you a good first impression. Spelling, formatting, I think this is quite obvious. If English is not your first language, please ask someone to help you to double check. Add your CV and cover letter as attachments and name the files accordingly. Because again, if you just call it CV, we have millions of emails with attachments that are called CV. So put CV and then your name. Use a neutral professional email address. So that can just be your name or a derivation of that. But again, don't send me an email from buttercup@gmail, for example. Or biotechnologygenius@gmail. These things, again, it's details, but we will notice, we will see those little things. And as I mentioned, don't just copy paste emails, the same email, the same body, exactly the same, but just sending it to different PIs within the same department or institute. Because of course, people talk. We will say, oh, you're looking for someone, or I got a good CV, or this or that. So again, it will not be a good impression if we notice that you've just been copy pasting and sending the same email to like 10 PIs. So I'm not sure if this is very readable for you, but I just wanted to give you a few examples. So this is an example where the person addresses me, dear Dr. Julie. I am this person, my position is a lecturer, I have a PhD in this field, I have X amount of papers, I hope to find a position. So of course, many questions are left. I don't know who is this person, what is your expertise, because working in the field of cancer can be many things. So it would be beneficial if that person had given a little bit more information. What position is the person looking for? Because he or she mentions that they are lecturers. So are they looking for a postdoc, or are they looking for an assistant position? What are they looking for? And what is also missing, obviously, from here is why are they emailing me and not one of my colleagues? What is interesting them into looking into my profile and my team? And the next one, that's another example. So here again, I mean, the person clearly says, I have a PhD there. My PhD work was focused on this kind of research. And I have experience with, for example, Western blot and ELISA. I worked with animals. I've also worked with human samples. So this is very clear to me what kind of expertise the person has. But again, what is missing is I'm not really sure. Are they looking for a postdoc, for example? And why, again, would you like to work in my team, in my research area? So this is very briefly what I would say that you have to be aware of when you send emails, which are basically out of the blue. Then the next thing is the cover letter. So oftentimes people forget about a cover letter. They just send a CV. But for me, a cover letter is essential because it really captures the highlights of what makes your profile stand out from other people. So cover letter again can be in response to a job ad or unsolicited. It's usually 1 to 1.5 page. So again, don't send us, 3, 4 pages. That's too long. Within 1.5 page, we really need to know or have a snapshot. Where did you come from? So what is your expertise and where do you want to go towards? So again, tailor your cover letter to the job description or to the team or the research area you're applying for. Oftentimes we see cover letters that are very generic. And then we also see, for example, the expertise that they're highlighting or mentioning really doesn't fit with what you are doing, for example. So again, as a group leader, that makes you think like, okay, they didn't really do their homework. They're just sending CVs to like whoever they find just to find a job. Then don't oversell yourself. Of course, it's good to highlight your strong points, but don't oversell yourself because again, that gives, this kind of arrogant feeling. So it's not a good impression. The same as I said for the emails, spelling and formatting, please make sure that this is up to par and add your contact details, add your email or add your mobile phone number. So what should be in the cover letter? Of course, the first section, the heading should be addressed to someone. It's preferred that you would address your cover letter to a certain person. For example, if you're applying to my group, you would address it to my name, or to a committee. For example, if you're applying for a PhD position, you would, at the university, you would address it to the admissions committee, for example, or any recruitment committee in general. Then the opening section would just be a few sentences. Again, who are you? Introduce yourself. For example, my name is Dr. Julie de Kock. I am a postdoctoral fellow in this lab, and now I would like to pursue a postdoctoral position in your group. If the position has been advertised, then you would add the job advertisement number as well. And mention your current position and relevant area of expertise. So then you can immediately say, for example, I'm a postdoc working in cancer research, focusing on something in that line. The middle section is really the part where you have to make sure your CV stands out. So this would cover 1 to 2 paragraphs usually, and this really summarizes your research experience. But again, tailored to the position that you're applying for. So if you're, of course, a junior researcher or you're quite early stage researcher, you can also include some training or internships or practical work that you have done during your educational training. If you're a little bit more advanced in your career, then you would leave that out and you would really focus on your work experience. So as I mentioned, this is really the important part of your cover letter. So you want to highlight novel findings and also give a little bit more of an indication of their relevance or significance. So don't mention all the different studies or all the different projects you have worked on. Really highlight some of the things that you're really proud of. And say, okay, I've worked on this and this was very important in the field. It was never reported first. It was the first study and we showed this. And then after that, many studies were done on the same, with the same topic, or we have been able to do that. And then following on this, we have a grant, something like that, to really highlight the important parts of your work. And again, as I mentioned, focus on experience that is relevant for the post. You don't need to give a whole summary of your professional experience because this can be seen in the CV. And then in the closing section, really, again, just a couple of sentences, the take-home message, basically. Why should the person hire you? What makes you the perfect candidate? Are you a good fit with the program, or would you actually be complementary to what the group or the team or the university is doing at the moment? And what makes you unique? So in just a couple of sentences, you can kind of summarize those aspects. And I'll just give you one example. Again, it might be too small for you to see, but basically to show you how it would look like. So this is a one-page cover letter, which has a heading, so addressed to the recruiter, which has an opening section saying I'm applying for research associate. Let me see if I can put my pointer for you. As you can see here, so I just mentioned it's a research associate position, and this one was actually advertised. So I put a reference. What is my current position? I'm a postdoctoral fellow. And what is my background? My background is tumor biology and some of the relevant skills. And then this middle section was the section that really needs to make you stand out. So here you say your general research interest, but then you focus on specific highlights. For example, you could say of particular interest is the work that I did in this lab, in this paper, and then following this work, this and this and this happened. There were more papers, or we got more grants, and so on. For example, in this letter, you can see that I highlighted, for example, that I worked in large multidisciplinary teams. I was very fortunate to work in European framework projects, so I highlighted that as well, to make sure that the recruiter was aware that I can work in a multidisciplinary and also multinational team. If you have any experience in teaching and supervision, if you think that it would be relevant for the position, you can also mention that. And then the closing section, where you basically highlight a few things that you think that might be interesting and that might put you in the forefront. So this is a cover letter. Now let's have a look at the structure of an academic CV. So just to, again, briefly highlight, an academic CV is different from a resume. A resume is basically what a pharma or the industry sector uses. So it's even shorter than a CV. It's just 1 to 2 pages. And it really focuses on experiences, skills, goals, and keywords that are used in the pharma industry. So you would not basically give your whole overview of all your professional experience. You will really focus only on those things that would be relevant for the job in the pharma. It is also different from a biosketch, which is often used when you have to submit, for example, grants or for government agencies, where they actually have like a preset structured summary that you just have to, plug in your data. And this is 3 to 5 pages long usually. I just put this here. So SITC, the Society for Immunotherapy of Cancer, has certain webinars that are available on their website if you're a member of SITC. And one of them is called Meet the Expert webinars. And I took a couple of slides from that webinar as well that I will share with you. So just for your reference. So what should be in the structure or in an academic CV? First of all, as you can see here in big letters, make sure your CV is updated. Oftentimes we have CVs that have not been updated. Of course, you cannot update, on a daily basis. But when you're planning to send your CV, make sure that at that time it is updated, because sometimes it will stay in the recruitment office or somewhere else for a few weeks. So then it's okay. But if you haven't updated it in months, by the time it will actually get to the PI to be reviewed, it will not be updated anymore. So one of the things we notice sometimes is positions are still being indicated as being active, while, for example, the person already left that position or that job. So it's always good to make sure that it's updated. Also, your reference, your publications, make sure they are updated as much as possible. So what should be in a CV? Of course, this is flexible. It's a bit fluid. But these are some of the items that I usually put in my own CV, and I often see in many of the CVs. So we will go one by one through each of those. So the first one is demographic information. Personal statement, I will not discuss because this is usually more for advanced career. So, for example, if you're looking for an independent group leader position, or if you want to go for assistant professorship in university. Then you have your education background, your positions, lab skills, honors and awards, teaching activities, service activities, and research output. So we will go through each of those. So what is demographic data? So this is basically let's call it the header, the top part of your CV. So it's always good to put a home address, so people at least have an idea of where is your current home basis. Make sure your email and phone number on your CV are up to date, because we've had problems in the past when you want to email or call someone and the number is disconnected, the email bounces back, and so on. So if we cannot contact you, sometimes we miss out on opportunities. So make sure this is always up to date. And there are, of course, no typos in for example, the phone number. You can also put links to your professional profiles, whether it's LinkedIn or ResearchGate or ORCID or any other profiles. Personal information. This is kind of tricky, I would say, because in certain countries, this would be seen as a breach of privacy. Like in the UK, I know that they're quite, sensitive about those things. But in other areas, it is actually quite useful if we know the citizenship or the marital status. As you can imagine, it's especially, for example, in the US, but also here in Qatar, it's quite important to know the citizenship, because then we can have an idea of whether we will be able to get like a visa for that person or not. Profile photo, again, is optional, but I have to say sometimes it is helpful, especially, for example, for someone like me, European, working now in the Middle East region. The names are very foreign for me. So if I get, for example, some Arab names or Indian names, it's difficult for me to know whether it's a female or a male. So in those cases, it's sometimes useful if there is a profile photo. But of course, this is your personal preference. Then we go to the education. So I would say anything in your CV, I would always put in chronological order with the most recent item at the top. Because normally I'm not really interested in what you did in your bachelor if I'm hiring you as a postdoc, for example. I would like to see what have you done for your PhD. And then if I'm interested, I will look at your master and your bachelor to have an idea of what kind of interest you have. But I would be more interested, first of all, in your PhD, so in your most recent education. So I would put PhD first, then master's, and then bachelor. Obviously, there is no need to go below your bachelor degree. If you like, you can put the title of your dissertation or of your thesis, because again, that gives us an idea of like, oh, this person has had an interest in cancer or has been working on genetics or developmental biology or whatever it is. And then a general rule again for CVs, always indicate the years clearly because you don't want to hide gaps. Okay, so if for whatever reason you had a gap year, that is fine, but don't try to hide it. So always make sure that it's clear when you have started your PhD, for example, or when you finished your PhD and so on. Because if it's not clear, I mean, the recruiter will ask you. It will be obvious. It will be flagged up. So in order to avoid this, just clearly indicate it. Okay, so this is just an example of my CV where you can see how it looks like. So this is what I call the header or the demographic data. And then you have the education where, again, as I said, put in chronological order with most recent at the top, going all the way down to bachelor. Now, the next thing, positions. Let's have a look what we do with this. So again, the same rules, chronological order, put the most recent position at the top. Depending on, again, where you are in your career, whether you're junior or more senior, I would advise you to include any internships, especially if you're junior, because that will really show that although you might not have had like an employment, you have been involved, you have shown the motivation and the will to be active, and to even on a voluntary basis do internships. Again, indicate clearly the duration because the gaps again will help us to understand what was happening. Because most of the time, I have to be honest, the recruiters are very understanding of gaps in your CV if they can identify and understand them. If you hide, and then it's a little bit more tricky because if you hide things immediately, you don't really make a good impression again. So the next part would be lab skills. So again, you can do different formats. I just give you two different examples of that section that I have seen in different CVs. So you can just put it as bullet points, as you can see in the top example, or you can make like a summary per like subcategory, let's call it like that. So it's up to you, however way you would like to do that. Of course, again, if you're a more junior person, this will be much shorter, the list, than when you're more advanced. So I would say for junior people, yes, put anything. I mean, DNA extraction, RNA extraction, that's fine. If you're a little bit more advanced, as a postdoc, for example, we all expect you can do a DNA and RNA extraction. So then I would be more interested to see the more, sophisticated techniques, to see whether you have experience with cloning, for example, whether you have experience with flow cytometry, with confocal microscopy, these kind of things. So again, you can tailor this a little bit based on how far along in your career you are. We have a section, honors and awards. Honestly, I didn't have any honors and awards for a very long time. So this is, again, an optional section. You can leave it out of your CV. It's perfectly fine. However, if you have anything, of course, it's nice to include it because it will look good on your CV. So if, for example, you got a scholarship from your university, or if you had some commendments from your university, or any awards for excellence, you can put it there. So again, make sure you put the date and where the name of the award and where it came from. For example, if it's from your university, clearly indicate that as well. And this is again just two different ways how you can put that in your CV. So again, it's up to you how you would like to reflect this. Then the next part is teaching activities. Again, of course, depending on your career, you might not have done any teaching. So this is an optional part. Also, depending on the position you're applying for, it might not be that important. So you might focus more your CV on your research activities and keep the teaching activities quite short. But if you're more advanced in your career and you're, for example, looking at independent group leader position, of course, it is important to highlight that you have some teaching experience. So again, these are just two different ways of doing that. But the most important is that, of course, you put the title of the course and the course ID, because this really shows that it was an official course that was recognized by the university. The program the course was given in, so if it's a master, a bachelor in biology or in medicine, whatever it was. What was your role in that course? Were you like a guest lecturer? Were you actually giving the course completely, like as a lecturer, a coordinator? What was your role within that course? Next to that, you can also mention supervision and mentoring activities, because sometimes as a postdoc, you did not have the opportunities to teach, but you had the opportunity to supervise someone in the lab or even mentor someone in the lab. So then it would be nice to highlight that. So again, two different ways of doing that. But the common factors are the dates. You mentioned the dates. You can mention the person you supervised. And then again, the program. So for example, it was a PhD from this university. In the US, I know they like to see a little bit of a description. For example, this person I supervised as a student in this course or in the lab, and what happened with that person afterwards, because this gives an indication kind of how good a mentor you have been. For example, this person then continue to do more postgraduate education, or at a later stage became a group leader themselves, and so on. Because again, that reflects a little bit on your supervision and mentoring skills as well. We have the service activities or professional activities. And again, this is something I think even as a junior postdoc, sometimes even as a PhD student, you can start including in your CV. Because oftentimes you are requested to review papers, or you have been involved in different committees, even as a student within your university. You might have been engaged in different committees and different activities. And then it's nice to showcase that, because it shows again that you're mature, you have the ambition, you have the competency, the managerial skills, organizational skills, and so on. So anything you have that fits this section, I would say include it in your CV. And again, these are just two different types of how you can represent that. Okay, and now the last part, but I would say maybe not the least, is of course research output, which includes different things. Your publications, any patents, if you have any, invited talks, and grant support. So again, each of those sections, of course, are flexible. If you're a junior researcher, you might not have patents or invited talks or grants. So you might just have publications. So it depends on your situation what you can include. For publications, I would always say include a Google Scholar H-index. So if you don't have a Google Scholar profile, I would strongly recommend you to actually register and make a profile, because this really gives us, again, a snapshot of what a person has been doing regarding publications. If you're a little bit more advanced in your career, you can also mention the number of citations. Again, make sure this is up to date. And as with all the other parts of the CV, at least in my personal opinion, I prefer to see the newest items on the top, clearly indicate the year, and then we go down. Because if I want to hire you now, I'm interested in what have you been doing the last couple of years. I'm not so interested in what you did 10 or 15 years ago. So put the most recent ones on the top. Highlight your name. Again, this is up to you whether you do it in bold or you underline, it does not matter. But this is something that will help us to quickly identify what your position is in that paper. Very important tips, and at least in my opinion, be genuine on authorship. So I would say show the full author list in your CV. So this is just an example of one of the papers where you can see I'm in the middle, because the author stops here. So I'm in the first half, I would say, of the authorship. So it's very important that this is clear. Compared to here, if you look at this kind of showing the reference or the publication, okay, I can see my name, but I have no idea. Am I third, fourth, fifth, sixth, 10, 20? I don't know what position this author is in. And then the same if you put the reference this way, okay, we have the first author, and then you put myself as a second author. This is not a correct reflection of where my authorship is, because I'm actually somewhere in the middle. I'm not second author. So be genuine on the authorship, and the easiest way to do this is just to show the full list of authors. Also important, add indicators when you're a first author, co-last, or corresponding author. Especially if you go for a postdoc and then later on for a group leader position, these are really things that we look at. We want to know, have you been first author or first co-last and corresponding? Because again, this shows that you have some kind of independent role within that paper. If you're really advanced in your career, I mean, you're like 10, 15 years plus into your career, of course you will have many papers. So we don't need to see 50 papers in your CV. So usually then you would limit it to the last 2 to 5 years, depending on the number of publications that would be. So what to include in your publication list? I would say peer-reviewed journals. Of course, again, if you're junior and you don't have a lot of peer-reviewed journals, you might end up with some local, papers or not very indexed papers, at least, PubMed index paper. So at that stage, I would say it's okay. But once you start to have your own peer-reviewed journal papers that are indexed in PubMed, I would only focus on that. And just as a side note, I wanted to mention as a general remark, be aware of predatory journals. Because if in your CV, in the end, we see, for example, you have 5 papers and 2 of them ended up in a predatory journal, again, it doesn't give a good impression. So whenever you're submitting a paper, be aware of that and be careful. Include published in press papers. In my opinion, and I don't think I'm the only person that shares this opinion, I do not like to see that you're mixing papers that are, or manuscripts that are in preparation, submitted or under review together with what is published or in press, because this gives a false image. It looks like you have 20 papers, but actually only 3 of those are published. And to have manuscripts in preparation, yes, you can have 10 manuscripts in preparation, but that doesn't mean they will actually materialize into a publication. So just stick to the published and the in press papers. If you have, again, if you're a junior person or if you have a really good paper that you're working on and it's submitted or under review, especially if it's a really good paper, we know under review can take 1 year, 2 years, it can take a long time to get accepted. That's fine. Highlight it in your cover letter or in your email, but especially in the cover letter, you can highlight it. So it will not be lost. But personally, I would not mix these kind of papers together with published work. Also clearly identify which of your publications are reviews or editorials or commentaries. Because again, sometimes you have CVs and they have 20 publications, like, wow, okay. And then you start to look at what are the publications actually about, and half of them are reviews. So again, this gives a wrong image. It's better to clearly indicate this was a review, and then there is no discussion. Optionally, you can also add an impact factor. This can help if you, for example, worked in a certain area and then you want to change your research field. Because, for example, if you would apply to my group, which is focused on cancer, but you have been working on developmental biology, I might not have an idea of what is a good impact factor for that field of research. So I cannot judge really the quality of your work. So in that case, it's always, it's helpful to have an impact factor, for example. You can also have separate subcategories where you focus on published manuscripts, then you put any book chapters separate, and then you can have an optional subsection, for example, the manuscripts that are under revision or that you have deposited on a preprint server. Also, you can include conference proceedings, especially again if you're a junior in your career, where you clearly indicate whether this was a poster presentation or a selected talk. This is just an example. So as you can see, I highlighted my name by underlining it. I clearly indicated the year. and I put an indicator, for example, for corresponding author. So if you have, for example, certain papers with co-first, you have some that you are co-last or you're corresponding, you can just use different indicators and highlight them here so that the recruiter has an idea of what they signify. The next section within research output could be patents. If you have any patents, you can highlight it there. Or any invited talks. Again, if you're a junior, it's okay. You can, add several invited talks over the years. If you're a little bit more advanced, I would say try to limit to the last 2 to 5 years. And again, there's different styles how you can do this, but the main component should be the date, which conference it was, and where the conference was held. And then optionally, you can specify the title as well. If you give many talks, I would sometimes leave out the title. So that's why I more use this kind of style, because the titles will be often very similar from conference to conference. So then sometimes it looks a little bit strange. So again, you tailor it depending on your situation. Grant support. Again, this can go from grant support as a PI, or it can be grant support you got as a scholarship to go to do your PhD or to do an internship. These are all the things that you can mention here. So you would make subcategories where you have pending grants, active grants, and completed grants. Clearly indicate the source, so which funding body gave you that grant, if it has an official ID, title, the dates. The amount, I would say, is optional. Some people do it, some people not. Your role, so clearly indicate were you the lead PI or you were co-PI. And sometimes people give a short description, as you can see in this example. It's just like 1 to 2 sentences long. Okay, so this is the structure of what I would say is an academic CV. So as I mentioned, some of the items in here are flexible. Some of them, of course, you have to have in there. You need to have your demographics, your education, your positions, lab skills, and research output. Those are a given. So depending on, of course, your career, you might have a lot of things to mention or not. So again, some of the things you might limit to the last 2 to 5 years. And I would say try to keep your CV to 5 to 10 pages. I have seen CVs that are 15, 20 pages long. I mean, again, it's discouraging. So try to limit it to 5 to 10 pages. This is just snapshots of 3 different CVs to show you what kind of format, what kind of layout you can use. So you could work with like a 2-column format and a big header, or a 2-column with a little bit of color and some kind of clip art illustrations here. Or you could keep it simple, just as 1 page, but you can use, different colors to highlight certain things. Because if you keep everything just black on white paper, it can be quite, not really interesting. It's not going to stand out. So very quickly, what is a resume? So a resume, as I said, is for industry, pharma sector. So this is really focused on transferable skills, which can include time management, because obviously in industry you have very tight deadlines, milestones, and many meetings. Communication skills with your team, with your peers, but also with upper management. Flexibility, because obviously in industry things happen fast, priorities can shift quickly. Funding can suddenly be switched from one project to the other, and so on. And in this industry, of course, you have a clearer career development compared to academia. But on the other hand, you also have the risk that, of course, within a company there can be restructuring and your position can be laid off. So those are some things to keep in mind. So a resume, as I mentioned, is very short, 1 to 2 pages. It has a short summary, your contact information, skills and abilities, your employment history. And then resumes, usually they have a short description of what you did within that project, for example, and what you achieved. Your qualifications, any CPD that you have done, so any additional training courses you have done, additional skills and experience is often of interest for industry, and your personal interests. And it's always good to use some of those keywords that are being used within the industry as well. Because oftentimes CVs for industries or resumes for industries go through like a screening software. So whenever you have those keywords in there, it will be picked up. Now, the last part, which is maybe not the least important, interviews. So once you get your email introduction or CV, cover letter, all gone through the hoops, finally you've been invited for an interview. So now what? I have to be very honest. As a recruiter, you often make your first impression within the first 30 to 60 seconds. So it's very fast. So this is done on body language and appearance. And I just took this image, which I thought was really, really obvious and really speaking for itself. So 67% of hiring managers focus on lack of eye contact. So if you never look the recruiters in the eye, again, it doesn't give you that connection that you need to really have a good interview. 26% really focus on the fact that the person is always, moving around and fidgeting with their hair or their hands and so on. A weak handshake, well, I don't know. I've never really experienced this, but apparently that has been mentioned as well. And 39% of interviews are put off if the candidate never smiles. So again, this gives you, the first impression of a person. You want someone that comes to interview with you to be motivated to be there, to want to be there. So you have to give off that positive attitude. So just some do's and don'ts. Dress professionally. I don't think this is a big issue in this region, but for example, in Europe and in the States, there's much more diversity, and sometimes people come in not really professional clothing. So dress professionally. As I mentioned, show a positive attitude, smile, keep eye contact, because this all will give the recruiter the impression that you are interested, you want to be there. You want to tell that person what you have been doing and why you would be the good candidate. Be prepared. Do your homework about the position and the employer. This is really important. If you interview with someone, you need to know why. What is the position about? What is this person doing? What is this university or this institute focused on? And whenever you've been asked a question, take a few seconds to think about it and then answer. It's always better to take a little bit of time and then to answer correctly, concise, clear, than to try to fumble your way through. One positive aspect, it's not mandatory, but it gives, again, a good impression, is if you can ask questions. Of course, don't ask about salary or how many hours you have to work or when you can be promoted. These are not the things to ask at the time of an interview. It is always nice if you can follow up your interview with just a thank you note, just a short email to say, thank you for the interview. I enjoyed meeting you, something like that. So what are the don'ts of an interview? Again, don't oversell yourself. Don't lie. I think for me, this is the biggest don't. Don't lie in an interview, because oftentimes the recruiter will know you're lying, either from, again, your body language or because of some of the things you say don't match up, or your CV does not cover what you said. So it's best not to lie. Just be honest if there were issues in your previous workplace, or if you had personal circumstances or anything, just be honest about it. And don't focus on what you think we want to hear. Because oftentimes we have interviews with candidates, and it's like, okay, they're just saying what they think we want to hear. We don't want to hear that, yes, you're fantastic and you know this and you know that. But if you say you know something, explain a little bit more, like, okay, yes, I have worked on this, and actually I focused on this and this aspect, and I did that, and that was interesting, and we will take it this way, and so on. Don't just say, oh, yes, I can do this, or yes, this is interesting, or yes, I like this. Don't just say what you think we want to hear. And then, as I said, be clear and concise. Don't ramble. We don't want you, if we ask a question, you have to be concise. We don't want to have an explanation that takes 5 minutes. if you think there are things that would be of interest, you can always say, oh, if you're interested in this, of course, I can explain a little bit more later on. Also very important, don't badmouth previous employers or colleagues. So if there were certain circumstances why you left a job or why you had a gap in your CV, be honest about it, but don't badmouth. If, for example, you had a dispute with a supervisor or a colleague, you can just simply say, I left the job because there was not a good fit, and I wanted to explore other areas or other places or so. But don't say I left because he or her did this or did that, because again, that does not show that you're a very, loyal person. So, summarize, I would say the 5 C's of a good interview is be confident, be credible, so have integrity, don't lie, have competency. Of course, your clothing, dress professionally, as I mentioned, and be aware of your circumstances, of your environment. Especially nowadays that we have a lot of virtual interviews, be aware of where you're going to have the interview and what is around you, who is around you, the noise, and so on. Because again, that will give a good impression and a professional impression. So just some example interview questions that you might expect. People might ask you to elaborate on a certain project, a paper, or a position. They might ask you, okay, what skills do you master? And can you explain that a little bit? Just to make sure that you don't put a skill on your CV that you've done once, or you have seen once, or you've been trained in once, because then you will fall through. Only put things on your CV that you really know how to do it. And as I mentioned, explain the gaps in your CV, whether it's experience-wise or even in publications. You can say, yes, I didn't publish for 3 years or 4 years because I had to shift project, or this project didn't work out, or we changed our focus, or we had to do a lot of troubleshooting, or we have a very big paper coming soon, because some things do take time. So just be honest. Obvious questions that often is asked: where do you see yourself in 5 years? What is your ambition and your goal? Why you? Why would we choose you? How do you fit this position, or why are you the best candidate? What are you most proud of, and what obstacles have you overcome, and how? So all of those questions, it's really to, again, kind of summarize your CV, your cover letter, your interview in 1-2 sentences. Like, okay, what is special about you? Why are you the best fit for this position? Experience-wise, different techniques, or science-wise, regarding your research area, and so on. Some questions that you can ask, because as I mentioned, it's always nice if you're interviewing someone that person shows, again, this connection, this interaction with the interviewees, with the recruiters. So you can ask very simple questions to then more detailed questions. You can say, how many people are in the team? Who will I work with, report to? What are the priorities of the job, of the project? Which skills are really necessary? Or what do you specifically look for this job? Or, for example, what is kind of lacking, or I need to work more on based on my CV and this application? What is the policy towards supervision of students, teaching, training, and so on? Technical support, all those things are example questions you could ask. And then the more, let's say, higher level questions would be, are there any collaborations? What is the long-term vision or goal? Why is this institute, unique or different from others? And then, of course, you can always ask, when is the position going to start? And when can I hear the outcome of the interview? Never be, too shy to ask that. That's perfectly fine. So with that, I would like to end. I hope I didn't go too much over time, and take any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Dr. Julie, for sharing those really comprehensive and very useful pointers with us. A reminder to the audience to please post your questions in the Q&A tab. Before moving to some of these questions, maybe I can begin with a couple. So, with interactions having been moved online or even at phone interviews for that matter, it can sometimes be challenging to make your personality felt or gauge the impression of the interviewers, especially if you can't see them. So, what is your advice in these situations to impress at virtual interviews?
Yes, I mean, that's a very good point. And we have noticed this during the pandemic, of course, when we all had to shift to virtual interactions and interviews. That's why if you do any virtual interviews, always put on your camera because body language is really important in these kind of situations. And also, even simple interaction, you know, the person has heard you, or maybe they don't understand the question, and so on. If it is a phone interview, of course, you don't have that option. Um, so then again, just be yourself, be honest. If something is not clear, just say, oh, I'm sorry, I don't think I really understand what you were asking me, or can you repeat this, or is this what you would like to hear from me? And I mean, with regards to your question about how can you really showcase yourself and your personality, this would be the way to do it. Just by being, you know, about, of course, polite, but open, honest, and positive. Really have a positive attitude and show that you're willing to be there, to be interviewed. You're happy to got the opportunity to be interviewed, and you're happy to answer any questions, basically.
Absolutely, thank you. My second question is, in the age of social media, how important do you think it is to have an active virtual presence on networking platforms like LinkedIn or Twitter? Do potential employers usually take this into account when making the decision to interview or hire?
From my experience, it's not really taken into account. However, I do have to say that, for example, the professional networks, let me call it like that, professional platforms like LinkedIn or SIT do help sometimes. For example, I've seen a CV recently from a student, and for his publications, he actually put a link to the ORCID. So this again gave me an impression like, okay, this person really knows about how within the scientific community we are actually being kind of evaluated, that this kind of ORCID platforms are really important, and that he clearly indicated all his papers nicely in his own profile. The same for LinkedIn. I would say yes, it shows that you have an interest that, and also you can find job advertisements, of course, through LinkedIn as well. So if you contact someone through LinkedIn because you saw a job ad, of course, that gives you a plus as well. So that would be a good thing to do. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Can we move on to some of the questions from the audience, please? Okay, so the first question we have is how to approach a job application if you're overqualified for the position, and how to approach this if your skills don't match the job, but you're interested in learning new skills.
Yeah, those are two very good questions. And I think that I have struggled with myself as well during my earlier career. How to approach a job when you're overqualified. Um, Again, cover letter. I would say the cover letter, and if you contact a person by email, the email introduction has to be very clear, because you can be overqualified, but then you have to highlight the aspects that would be really relevant for that job. For example, let's say you're a senior postdoc, but you would like to work as a research associate. Just highlight really the things that you think would be important as a research associate. The other thing I would say is, of course, mouth to mouth communication is very important. If you want to apply somewhere and you know you're overqualified, it's always helpful if you can talk to someone directly, the recruiter, or via you can talk to that person. So they know, they are aware you're overqualified, but also you're okay to actually kind of downgrade in, for example, your pay scale. Which sometimes happens. People, you know, they pursue a certain academic career, and then at some point they say, no, I don't really want to go that way. I want to be like more permanent staff. That's perfectly fine. That happens sometimes. So that's for sure an option. And then the second part, how to approach a recruiter if your skills don't match the job. So again, cover letter. It's very important to highlight that, or to make it clear from your cover letter that you're um, eager learning and you're a quick learner. So you could highlight, for example, in your cover letter that you have developed a new skill, developed a new method, or that you were proficient with this and this skill or method within the lab, and that you quickly picked up on this new method, and that you helped someone, for example, or you supported someone with a certain method. So even though, for example, you don't have experience with, let's say, mass spec, for example, but you can show in your cover letter you are able to learn and you can step up and you have been able to adopt different kind of lab skills, for example, that might also not be, the most easiest ones. That will give the recruiter a feeling of like, okay, this person can learn it. It's not a big deal.
Absolutely. I think that really showcases the importance of the cover letter in an application. Um, is it crucial to explain career gaps in your CV? I think you briefly mentioned this also in your talk.
Yes, yes. Um, Yes, 100%. Okay. So obviously you don't have to explain what happened during that gap, but you need to clearly indicate the gap. So if you had a gap year or two, don't hide the date. Just put it as it is. And it will often come up in the interview. And then again, I mean, if it's a personal matter or anything else, just be honest about it and say there were some personal circumstances because of which I had to take a break or something like that. And most people will just, happily accept that. While if they see that something doesn't really match up in your CV, again, people will be suspicious. So just to clearly identify yeah, your years, basically, your dates.
Okay. How can I highlight examples of acquired soft skills in
Mhm.
my academic or research CV?
Yes. I would say two things. You can, of course, again, cover letter. I always go back to cover letter, but that's really important. But even in your CV, you can do that because you have the professional or the services activities. So, for example, any time management skills, any organizational skills, you can highlight them there. For example, if you've even been organizer of, for example, early career researcher webinars, you can put that there because that's a service activity that shows you have organizational skills, you have communication skills, or if you had students with a small budget that you had to manage, you can put that there as well. All these kind of soft skills, managerial, transferable skills, anything you have, you can mention.
Great. Can we have the next question? Okay, how soon can I follow up after my application submission or interview if I haven't heard back from?
Yeah, that's a good question and can be a sensitive question. um, so usually I would say people try to get back to you within 1 week. Um, Maybe in certain, countries or regions, it can take longer because they might have more applications. So it can be 2 weeks. Um, what I would say is, depending on where you are, I would follow up after 1 to 2 weeks obviously, and this is why I said during your interview, at the end of the interview, you can always ask them like, okay, when can I expect to hear the outcome? And they will give you an idea whether it's something that they can do quickly or not, because it all depends on how many candidates they already interviewed and how many they still have scheduled. So don't feel shy, just ask at the end of the interview. If for some reason you didn't, or you forgot, or you didn't get the opportunity, just follow up after like 1 to 2 weeks.
Great, makes sense. Okay. In the education section with masters and PhD, if you continue to do other executive masters or professional certificates, are these also listed chronologically, or should the PhD always be first and then everything else chronologically, even if the minor ones come first?
Okay. That's a good question. So I'm assuming the person means that the PhD was the most recent one, but they actually had, for example, an MBA before that or something else.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So in that case, I would still put it chronologically, but you can highlight it again in your cover letter. And if you have any certificates, you can put that under your professional development. So you can also highlight those there. So yeah, that's what I would suggest to do.
Great. What else do we have? Okay, why is it bad to ask about salary? Isn't it an important point to at least have an idea about this from the beginning?
Yeah, I would say if you're going for pharma industry, obviously, I mean, that's okay. I think that it's acceptable. If you go to academia, it's usually not appreciated if you do that. Especially, for example, here, if you think about Qatar, you would think like, oh, they're only interested in the money. They don't really, they're not really interested in the position or in the research. They just want to know how much money they will get. So that's why, and usually in academia, it's not really something that is appreciated. I know in pharma it's different, but in academia, I would not do that.
Yes, and sometimes there are separate follow-up interviews with the HR, so maybe under those conditions,
For
it's more
sure.
appropriate
Yes,
to ask these
yes. And
questions.
even then, I mean, sometimes the recruiter themselves will not have, the details of the salary.
Yeah.
Because it will be based on the HR policies, which grade you will fall in, which benefits you can have, and so on. So yeah, if your interview is successful, then and you're put forward, then usually those kind of conversations can be done, negotiations together with HR.
Yeah. Okay, so if the CV is confirmed to be viewed online, can we provide the related links to the publications or hyperlink the publication titles? So I
Yes,
guess a soft copy, yeah.
yeah, for sure. It's always, I mean, or you can make a link for the publications themselves, or you can, as I showed you, you can, for example, put your Google Scholar or your ORCID link so that they can directly click on it and they see all your publications. That might be easier because if you hyperlink every publication, again, I'm not sure how, aesthetically, how the layout would look like.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Okay, how long should I wait to contact a professor if I've already contacted another one from the same department and have not received any response from them?
Okay. So first of all, I would say don't just randomly, contact different people within the same institute or department, because it gives again the impression that you don't have a focus. You don't really, have an ambition or a passion of what you want to do. You just want to have a job. You just want to have a position. So try to avoid sending your CV or cover letter to many people. However, of course, within a certain department that has, for example, a cancer department where all the group leaders are working in the same area, you might have an interest in different specific projects. So that is fine. So if this is the case, I would say give the PI or the professor, give them a couple of days up to like a week. If they don't respond, just send a gentle email and say, please, a kind reminder regarding my previous email. Would you be interested to discuss and something like that? If they don't respond, then of course you can go ahead and contact someone else.
Yes. Do we have more? Okay. Who are the ideal people to choose as a reference?
Okay, yes, that's a very good question. Usually, we would expect your reference to be your direct supervisor from your current job, or if you're currently unemployed from your previous job. And let's say you're like a junior postdoc, that would be your current postdoc position, and then also your PhD supervisor. If for whatever reason, you have a dispute with your PhD supervisor or postdoc supervisor, whatever it is, then you can always put someone that you worked closely with within the lab. So even if it's, someone who is like a little bit more senior than you, like a senior postdoc or a lab manager or someone like that. But preferably it would be your current supervisor and then the one before that.
Great. Is it a good idea to send a CV and a cover letter with the first email, or just a brief summary of the candidate in the email body and wait for a reply to see if the employer is interested and then send these other documents?
No, send it immediately, because your email will give a teaser, right? So the person will be like, oh, okay, that sounds interesting. Whatever this person has been doing is interesting. So immediately they want to know more. So if you add your CV and your cover letter with your first email, they can immediately check out your whole profile and then get in touch with you when they're interested. So yes, send it with your email.
Okay, maybe we can have one last question in the interest of time. How to approach a group leader that you're interested in their research, but they're not advertising a job? How would you start and what would you say?
Yeah. So as I mentioned before, you can just send an email if you can find their email address on websites or through publications where they are corresponding author, or if you try to get it through someone else. So just send them an email, and as I explained before, describe who you are, what you have been doing, what you're looking for, and why you're interested in this group, because it fits with what you have done, or it goes, into a different area of research and so on. So I would say to this person, have a look at what I mentioned in the start of the talk about the email introductions.
Great. So in the interest of time, let's keep it short because I think we're slightly over, but I mean, there are so many questions coming in and it seems to be a really engaging topic for a lot of the audience. So with that, I'd like to thank you, Dr. Julie, for sharing your time and expertise with us today. It was an extremely useful session. We really appreciate it. And I'm sure the audience has gained plenty of new insight on how to set oneself up as a strong contender for the next opportunity. So thank you so much.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
I'd also like to thank the audience for joining in today and for your active participation. So if you've missed any of our previous webinars or would like to go over this again, these will be posted on the HVKU YouTube channel. Also, keep a watch out for our next webinar announcement, which is scheduled for the 7th of July. And this is on the power of networking, especially in science. So if you'd like to join in for that, you can register for that as well. And also, if there are any other topics you'd like us to cover in the future, please feel free to send us an email as well. And lastly, I'd like to thank the wonderful technical team running the show behind the scenes, Ms. Reem and Mr. Omer from the QBRI Communications Office, and Dr. Salam, a fellow postdoc. So have a great afternoon, and thank you again for joining in. Stay safe, stay well, and stay inspired. Thank you.